Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to Connected Cafe. We've got Peggy George trying to help Kathleen get connected, but Ira is connected, and he's here. Ira, I'm turning on my video, saying hi. I'm at home tonight. Are you there? You're going to turn your mic back on. That'll be fun. Well, thanks for joining us, folks. There are several programs going on right now with Connected Educator Month. If you haven't joined Ed Connector, it's a very cool kind of concept. I haven't played around with it as much as I would have liked yet, but I did discover somebody with very similar interest to me and have made a note to follow up on it. The book clubs are going. There are badges. The badge of the day is Connected Educator Month Promoter, and if you finish the session, you will get a link to the badge. And those of you who may have tried it last night and it didn't work, there was some small glitch, and apparently it's been fixed. So you can indicate where you're listening in from by using the star to the left of the map. Click on it twice and then click on map. Put a note in the chat. I am still in Asheville, North Carolina. We had a very nice day. Are we entirely North America? Katie, fun to see you back. It's a busy night tonight. I expected we might have a little bit of a smaller group because there's so much going on. Knoxville, you're not far from me, Monica. Busy month, particularly busy night. I can still hear Peggy and Kathleen talking, so I know they're working on this. Well, let's get started with Ira. Okay, so this is kind of a party environment. I have gotten emails from people anxious to get the recording link, so I do know people are enjoying the recordings. Ira, thanks for coming tonight. Sure glad you're here.
Well, it's good to be here, Steve. And I have a little bit of a cold, but fighting through it, so we'll be fine.
Okay. So at this stage, I would normally ask you and Kathleen to both introduce yourselves. I don't know that that makes sense until let's give Kathleen a couple more minutes. So while we're waiting for Kathleen, let's do the what you learned today exercise. So those of you who are in the room, if you learned something interesting or valuable today, it doesn't have to be a part of Connected Educator Month. It can be just something that came up. You can either type it on the whiteboard using the A icon, the typing tool, or you can put it in the chat. And what did you learn? What did you learn today? I learned a way to show all of the recording links for the sessions in this room that I had never known. That's going to save me hours of time. Someone wrote, great conversation with the owner of a local diner in Holland, Michigan. That must be Ira. About imposing cultures. Oh, there's a deep dive. Imposing cultures on people. Ira and I are going to have a lifelong conversation, I think, about some of these topics. Getting a wider audience for students is good for project-based learning. Learn that MoveNote presentation has an iOS app. I don't know what MoveNote presentation is. If you're the one writing that and you want to grab the mic, just click on the talk button and tell us what MoveNote is. Explore the Neon site after last night's mention and link. Sensitivity and environment stimulus. So I would actually think that the opportunity to learn from just about anybody is a sign of a healthy moment.
Well, you know, Steve, my dad always told me that everybody out there in the world could teach you something, and I've always tried to walk into every room with that in mind. And it was fascinating to talk to somebody I've known for a very long time, somebody I get my breakfast from, and I've had a lot of conversations about a lot of things, and talking about working across regions, and sort of thinking deeply about that with what you expect from people, what sort of northern and urban judgments in southern and rural places, and what that means. But I think that, one of the things that I always think is that every time I spend a minute in a classroom, I learn far more from the students and the teacher involved than they can possibly learn from me. I go into every meeting with that. I never think, and I'm always sort of shocked that other people think that they go into spaces to do the teaching, when it's always at least a two-way street, if not dominantly coming the other way. So
I'm remembering when I spent a day with you recently, that we went into a special ed class, or maybe that's not even the right phrase, but there was a class where students had faced some challenges, and we were talking about how they have the opportunity to do things in a much healthier way than is often done in a normal classroom, and it felt like there was a lot of really authentic learning taking place. Can you describe that better than I just did?
Well, I think that, one of the things we've really tried to do is, in Albemarle County, and I've tried to work with for a long time, is to take down those, is to help people take down those barriers, and the biggest barrier being the thoughts about what individual students are capable of doing, because capability and ability and inability and disability are all sort of very unstable concepts, and shift radically as you go through the day, and as you shift what's through a variety of tasks. The room Steve is talking about was a middle school classroom where students who would generally be listed as having some pretty profound difficulties with school in general were really able to engage in their work without those barriers being in place, and a lot of things come into play there, and a lot of the things that we try to break down that school usually creates as barriers are, for example, time. We try to give kids the time they need to work things out for themselves. School is, often referred to as cells and bells. it's a system of adult-driven pacing done for adult comfort and adult organizational systems. And we try to break that down, giving kids the time and the flexibility of time to, structure their own learning at a pace that works for them. We try to make the technologies work for the kids so they can make the technologies work for themselves. So, for example, our one-to-one computers are as unlocked down as possible at the middle school and high school level. The students are administrators of their own machines. They get to add applications and software as they need to. We run Windows 8, so we can add apps. We have the full, for example, Freedom Stick suite of applications built in, so they have all sorts of accessibility software built in from the start. Lots of choices for them to make about how the computer will, for instance, read to them, or they will dictate to the computer if they want to do things like that, or use math tools and calculators and things. We also try to just not use a lot of judgments about if a student, is more comfortable having the book read to them than decoding it. We're interested in them getting access to the story and comprehending it. We're not so interested in the specifics of how. We try to even build our our evaluation process in a much more flexible way so it reflects this student learning. We struggle even with the ideas of rubrics, which are built by adults. We don't want to count the number of times a student does something or does something correctly by our standards or uses appropriate language or stuff. We want the students to create those sort of judgment systems for themselves, so they have ownership of it. And what we've generally found is that when we create those environments, the student success rate goes, dramatically up. But it's, to us, whether it's a special ed kid or any kid, it's all about shifting ownership of the learning process from the teacher, from the adult to the student. And that's sort of what drives us.
This is becoming a theme of these cafes. Kathleen is here. Kathleen, in just a second, we're going to welcome you and invite you in, but I want to kind of drill down on this in a really specific way, Ira, because you're just such the perfect guest for this. Right, so I do this experiment in groups when I'm speaking at a conference, and I'll play rock, paper, scissors with them, and we'll kind of winnow down to a small kind of winning group. And I'll say, you're the winners. Are you hardworking people? Yes. Are you honest? Yes. Do you try and do the best you can? Yes. So you're winners. And then I look at the rest of the group and I'll say, okay, so you're the losers, right? Are you any less hardworking? Are you any less honest? But does a game of chance actually make you feel like you're not valuable? So I did this in this one conference and kind of trying to say that there are a lot of things that are variables that people have no control over. What family you're born into and what neighborhood, and did you have a teacher who really took an interest in you? And a guy sat down next to me at lunch and he said, well, after all is said and done, the top 10% always rise up. Do we have kind of do we have a cognitive dissonance in our culture about school, that it's supposed to be empowering and create self-direction, but for a lot of kids it almost does the opposite?
Well, at the risk of getting myself in trouble, as I often do, I think that the intention of school as it was designed, and which is sort of my particular area of scholarship, and the intention of school as it's usually run in the United States is to make sure that society reproduces itself with all its inequalities. And so I believe that the goal of many of the people, no matter how well-meaning they sound or even perhaps are at face value, is that power structure and the economic balance not get threatened. And so we don't really want the poor to do too well. We don't want the kids who start at the bottom to do too well. The challenge to that is, and I think that, and this is where I really part company with a lot of the work some of the major foundations have done in this country, in which I think that, they are engaged in what I call a colonial schooling process akin to what the British Empire did in the 19th century, that their goal is to first waste a great deal of the poor's time teaching them to be like some strange copy of a middle class which doesn't really exist, and then to leave them increasingly behind as the kids grow up. But I think what we're trying to do, and we're really trying to do it in an authentic way, is to say, let's stop wasting the kids' time, the kids' cognitive energy and time on a lot of things that have nothing to do with the world at the moment. I sat through, I worked with a teacher at one of our middle schools, and it's a fairly high poverty middle school. I worked with him for a whole day. He's a 7th grade history teacher. It's in one of our one-to-one initiative areas. And, I watched and I said at the end of the day to our superintendent that I thought that, kids in middle schools now were just a lot nicer than kids were in my day and age. But then I reflected on it, and I realized that a lot of what we've done is to take away the silly kind of socially constructed rules that drive poor kids insane. We don't tell them to sit up straight. We don't tell them to show all the marks of this supposed upper middle class civility. We don't tell them not to chew gum. We don't tell them to stop rolling around in their chairs. We don't tell them to sit down even when they stand up. We don't tell them to get off the floor if that's where they're comfortable. We let them move. We let them be who they are, sort of within their culture and within their society. We let them be comfortable. We let them sort of exist. We let them make noise. We let them do all sorts of things. And they suddenly don't need to spend their time fighting back against us. They can instead engage in the actual learning. They can participate in it fully in their own way. We don't make a big deal over the absolutes of language. We're not so concerned with that. There's a lot of time to refine a lot of things later. What we're interested in is critical thinking and the ability to investigate the world and building the confidence to do that, and making sure they understand that their thoughts and opinions are every bit as valuable as anyone else's in the world, and to connect them fully that way. So, but I think that takes a big risk politically, to say to kids that grow up with nothing that you were inherently equal, to tell them that they are not starting behind, to tell them that they are not suffering from deficits, that they have inherent skills that are equal to anybody else's, because that challenges the inherent privilege of the privileged. And, it comes with political risks to say and do that.
Okay, don't hold back, Ira. Kathleen, let's test your microphone. You're here. Let's see if it works. You click on the talk button at the top left.
Hi, Steve.
You see 'em. Hey, you're there. Okay. I'm so glad it's
on video for a minute or two.
Okay. I'm so glad it's the two of you. You're caring for a baby there.
Yes.
But it's okay. So we didn't really get, we were waiting for you to come on before we just sort of did the backgrounds, but could you give the 3-minute overview of your background? Because if Ira doesn't know you, I think he's going to really be interested.
Well, I'm certainly interested in him from what I just heard him say, which I completely agree with. What a wonderful school you are describing, Ira. It sounds like you're in a lot of schools like that. I hope that's true. Am I not supposed to be able to hear you if you respond?
He hasn't said anything back.
I work in a school division with 26 schools right now.
And are those schools, middle schools that you just described, that wonderful description, is that what your schools are like?
Well, we're trying to get them all there. We're doing our best.
That's really pretty impressive. And I've been in a lot of middle schools and high schools too recently, doing a lot of work on social emotional learning. And I mean, what you were describing is exactly what I would most wish for in a school, that one takes children exactly as they are and helps open them up to the world that they can be in, which is different.
Kathleen, give us your background. I think people need to know more about you.
Okay. Well, I've been an education reporter for about 30 years, an education journalist. So, well, I guess it's not really 30. I started doing that in 1989 and reported around the country on mostly secondary schools, middle and high schools. First with the Coalition of Essential Schools, and then with the schools in the Annenberg Challenge. And then I helped to co-found a small nonprofit called What Kids Can Do. And my job shifted at that point from talking primarily with adults about schools to talking with students about their experience of schools and documenting their experience, asking them questions, recording what they say, and thinking about what they say, so as to make sense of it in terms of what teachers and educators in general are asked to do. So I'm probably best known for my book, Fires in the Bathroom, Advice for Teachers from High School Students. I work largely with students that are marginalized by class or by color or by language or by opportunity, lack of opportunities. And essentially I ask them the questions that I'm interested in and the questions that I know teachers are interested in too, which is really how do they experience their learning. So in the last 4 years, I've spent most of my time thinking about the question of student motivation and student mastery. In other words, the big question that has centered my research over the last 4 or 5 years has been, what does it take to get really good at something? And I've engaged students, hundreds and hundreds of students around the country in this question, and what's come out of it is very rich descriptions by students of the things that they're already good at, and together we use the scholarly research and the scientific research on the development of expertise, the sources of motivation and things like that, and we use their own lives as kind of examples of that. In other words, they tell me the things that they work hard at getting to do, even though they're challenging, how they deal with the frustrations, all those kinds of things. And then we compare it to what the sciences of learning tell us about those things, where the scholarship on development of expertise tells us about things like the different kinds of practice and spaced repetition and all those kinds of things that people are looking into these days. And then after that understanding, after we reach that understanding, we start looking at school and say, and what that results in is a kind of critique by the students, an informed critique of the way their school experience actually takes place on the ground. And those critiques appear in my book, Fires in the Mind, What Kids Can Tell Us About Motivation and Mastery. And more important, and as a follow-up to that, the book, The Motivation Equation, which is a free multimedia ebook in which students and teachers and learning scientists together look at situations, learning situations in schools, and see what is working from the students, from the learner's point of view. So that's, I think I'll stop now. Sonia,
I'm giving you a standing ovation for maintaining your line of thinking with all of the baby care. I think that's just phenomenal.
Well, you know, if I were at this hotel conference right now, I'd probably have Sonia in my arms too. And having quite, I'm one of 7 kids, and having sort of grown up in the Army and an Army family, moved around a lot, I'm pretty used to rolling with the punches. But I appreciate, I'm going to keep the call right now. So,
okay. So, while Kathleen continues to care for the baby, Ira, I'd like everybody to know the 3 to 5 minute story of you as well, because this is not happenstance. The two of you are on the show, and I mean, it is and it isn't. But Kathleen will want to know, and our audience will want to know. Kind of tell us a little bit about what brought you to where you are.
Well, it's a strange path to working in education for me. I've always said that I probably hated every minute I spent in a school as a student. Well, I liked kindergarten. I think I really did. Everything since then, including graduate school, was I despised just about every single day. I've really never been very good at school, and I went through sort of K-12 with all sorts of multiple diagnoses as a special ed student. And for instance, reading has never been something I could do particularly well. And writing by hand is nothing I have ever been able to do at all, particularly, which are two of the things that sort of school has traditionally expected you to be able to do. So school was pretty miserable. I lucked out and had a brilliant high school, alternative school experience finally, under a sort of master teacher named Alan Shapiro, who started an alternative school with Neil Postman and Charlie Weingartner in New Rochelle, New York, which I describe as a sort of school that saved my life. An ungraded, attendance not required, figure it out yourself kind of school that was brilliant and succeeded with a mass of students that probably wouldn't have succeeded anywhere else. And then I swore I would sort of never sort of do school again, but I actually did attempt college 4 different times before I finally got a bachelor's degree. And on the 4th try, I sort of stumbled into a group of ed psych profs who helped lead me into what I then called assistive technology in terms of special education, saying to me, if there's computer stuff now that can read to blind people, so why couldn't it read to you, and pushed me in that direction. I spent a lot of years working with special ed students on assistive technology and equipping universities and schools with what I always call the federally required accessible computer software that most schools don't have. Later I got invited back to school and made the odd choice to work on a doctorate in education, which I still think was an odd choice and probably wouldn't do it again. In which I ended up, because I was fascinated by why schools don't change, mapping the history of U.S. education and how our schools came to be, which is a pretty ugly story. I mean, it's a system literally designed to fail 80% of students. So I always say to teachers, we're doing a lot better than the design was meant to do. It's not the teacher's fault. It's a system designed to brutalize students. And every grade level expectation we have, the fact that we divide students up by age, is all designed to fail students from the start. So everything you're doing that gets more than 20% of kids through is just your sort of hard work to beat the design system. I've worked in a bunch of schools, high schools and elementary schools and middle schools. I've worked with a lot of students, primarily special ed students, in a bunch of environments. I've ended up most recently in the Albemarle County schools around Charlottesville, Virginia. It's what I'd call a medium-sized school system in the U.S. It's about 13,500 students. We have 26 schools, 3 comprehensive high schools, and on down, where I'm sort of what's called the design program manager, sort of lead an innovation team trying to change things as significantly as we can. We have sort of a unusual charge among school districts in this country, which is to sort of radically rethink what teachers do every day and what our schools do every day, and it's a pretty exciting opportunity. Our school board has decided that the standardized tests our kids take all the time are not a valid measurement and not a valid way to look at school, so they want us to do something significantly different. It's a school system that has, for the past 12 years, embraced what they call their lifelong learning competencies as much more important than the state's academic standards. That is, what kind of adults will our children grow up to be? How will they succeed in life, in work, as citizens of their community, their nation, their world? And we treasure that for our kids. So we're trying to raise interactive, excited children from whatever communities they come from. We have some of the wealthiest in the country, and we have some of the poorest in the country at the same time, both urban and rural. We cover 726 square miles, from horse farms to hollows in the Blue Ridge Mountains, from urban to incredibly rural. But we have kindergartners who are on Twitter and Skyping every day. We have high school students who last year beat 11 colleges in an autonomous sailboat robot competition. We believe that our students are the most qualified people to control their learning, and we're pushing for that. We think our teachers are the most qualified people to lead their own professional development, and we're pushing for that. So it's an exciting place for me to be, and an exciting time. So finally, I'm sort of a little happy to be in schools.
Yeah. Okay. This is when I wish we had 3 hours. We don't. But Tom DeBoer, who would normally be here for the top of the hour preview of the next day, is celebrating his birthday with his family. Good for him. So I'm going to give an abbreviated version of what's going on tomorrow. There's so much going on tomorrow. It's the last day of the 1105 Media's Wireless Ed Tech Blended Conference. MacArthur's webinar series on mobile learning also continues with the 1 p.m. Eastern time Connected Learning TV topic. When implementing mobile and learning environments, what do we need to consider about the relationships between adults, youth, and technology? It's a panel discussion. Then National Geographic and Annenberg are launching this MOOC. All of this is on the Connected Educator Month calendar. There's a 4 p.m. EdWeb Rosetta Stone webinar on bilingualism. There's a 5 p.m. EdWeb COSIN, ISTE, etc. Discussion with UNESCO on global potential of mobile learning. There's a 5 p.m. EdWeb PLN, how to build a PLN, a 5:30 powerful learning practice, and peek into the life of the connected learner. This is phenomenal. There's just no way you can do it all. But 7 p.m. there's an Edmodo session, Connection to Collaboration. There's an 8 p.m. American Federation of Teachers, Common Core Confidence series. There's an 8 p.m. Twitter chat on a National Principals Month. There's a 9 p.m. National Writing Project. And if you go to one or more of those, you deserve an award, and you must have a magic job that can allow you to take that much time away. Okay, so thanks for that quick break. Our commercial sponsors. Here's what I'd like to do to start. Normally at this point we would be sort of well into kind of deep passions, but I think both of you have done a good job of kind of communicating some of that to us. What I want to do now is do kind of an open question moment. And Ira, if you want to ask Kathleen a question, you could. Kathleen, if you want to ask Ira a question, you could. Or anybody in the audience can grab the microphone and ask a question at this point. And I'm going to start. And I actually am going to address my question to Peggy George. Peggy, you read Postman and Weingartner. I know you read John Holt, right? What do you think about kind of what's happening both in Kathleen's world and in Ira's world? 30 years, 40 years later, or however many years it is, are we seeing a resurgence of those ideas? Oh, and you have to take the mic, Peggy. I'm not going to allow you not to. Maybe you won't.
Do I really have to?
You have to.
I just love being in the background here, but I just get such wonderful memories thinking about those books. And like I said in the chat, I still have those books on my bookshelf because they were the roots for my, certainly my education career. And I was lucky enough to be able to complete my doctorate and master's work at UMass Amherst, where back in the 60s and early 70s, there were lots of very progressive educators there. And that was the norm, humanistic education and values clarification and all of those kinds of concepts were what we believed and what we were promoting. Open education, following the British primary model, was part of my my roots there. And so I believe in it really deeply, and I'm so excited to know that I don't think it ever really went away, but it certainly went in the background, and other things like NCLB and standardized testing and all those things have taken over. But that was the way education is and was and should be in terms of real, authentic learning for students, joy in learning. Learning as a subversive activity. I just smiled when I saw that word again. You know, it seemed subversive at that time, but it really wasn't. And I suppose just like we use the term disruptive education now, some people think that that's a negative term, but in fact, I believe it's a very positive term that says we can approach education in new challenging ways of seeing things, like Michelle talked about last night when she was talking about her Hacking Education blog. So those are just a few of my thoughts.
Peggy, thank you so much. Ira, did you ever read, encounter, have much awareness of Ted Sizer and the Coalition of Essential Schools?
A little bit, and I've been influenced by a bunch of their work. I've been influenced a bunch by John Holt, who when I first discovered that work, of course, much later, was a huge influence. And one of the things that I first stumbled on in John Holt that I loved was, as a former special ed student, was when he asked his students what they thought the cruelest words used in the school were. It turned out they were all the things their special ed teachers called them, honey and sweetie and, all those things. And one of the things that all of these people taught me was that listening to kids is the most important thing. And one of my big things that I learned early in working with kids was to take them away from the school building, even if it was just outside onto the playgrounds and stuff, to get them to really talk about school where they wouldn't filter their observations. And I've learned to extend that to teachers and principals. I like to get people outside the buildings to really sort of listen. And Sizer has so much to say about understanding schools as sort of a learning outsider. But I also have found that when I've spent a lot of time observing, like, just primary schools, for example, in Ireland, where they don't divide kids by age, and watching what happens when you do that, when you break the paradigms that we think are natural in this country. When societies choose to make different decisions about, how to do things. So a great deal of what I think is always the key thing is looking and listening.
Kathleen, so I'm sure you're sort of saying the same thing I am, which is kind of, wow, what a fun small group to have assembled here. What more can you tell us about kind of what drives you? What sort of, aside from what you've already discussed, what kinds of things do you really care about?
Well, I was really brought up by Ted Sizer. I had the great good fortune of moving into his house right after I left college, and I was a teenage mother. I had a baby in college, and she was 2 when we moved into the Sizer's house, and was more or less the start of my life as a publishing journalist. And so he was really like a father to me in many, many ways. And he, my own father was in Vietnam. My family was far, far away, and I was trying to be a mother at the age of 21. So he was probably my greatest influence. And later, much later, in 1995, we and some other local people got together and started a school. And I mean, during those years between 1989, when I began writing about the Coalition of Essential Schools, and really fell under his direct tutelage in that, and 95, I had visited many, many different kinds of schools around the United States that were part of the Coalition of Essential Schools, and actually some of them remind me of the schools that you described, Ira, in New Rochelle. I mean, there's a wonderful school up in Rochester that sounds a lot like that, School Without Walls, and there were just amazing schools, all different kinds of schools. So being in those schools gave me a sense of how the design of a school can make so much difference in the lives of the learners in the school. I myself went to 11 different schools. I'm an Army brat, and we moved around pretty much all the time. And one of those 11 was a pretty good, very traditional school in Washington, D.C. I graduated from Fort Campbell High School, and in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and that was, I would say, that was a pretty indifferent school, and I was there anyway. I slept through most of my days because I was working 40 hours a week at a print shop where I was getting a huge education in how to turn words into type. So every day I would get dropped off at the school bus at 3 o'clock and work until about midnight. And it was, the Vietnam War was gearing up, and everybody needed their name tapes printed. Everybody needed their stuff, and that was the greatest education I got. And it sent me right into the world of publishing. Right the minute I got to college, I started working for book publishers because of that. So so then when I saw, I was kind of mixing two stories together, but when at the time that we were ready to take the experience, the Sizers, Nancy and Ted Sizer, and I and some other educators in this little Massachusetts town wanted to try to make a lab school for the Essential Schools movement. And it was right when Massachusetts had passed its charter law, so we got one of the first 5 charters. And, you know, it was a little strange to be bedfellows in a movement that was, you know, a mixed bag of people, just like homeschooling is, and mixed bag of, I shouldn't say people, but philosophies. And so we decided to make a completely ungraded, that is, ungraded mixed age groupings, but no grades in the school. We decided to make a school where students were not slapped with a grade when they tried to do something. And I'm sure it had something in common with your school, Ira. We took children who were going into 7th grade and through 12th grade and created a school where you moved forward when you could show what you could do and you could show that you were ready to move on. And so the experiences that we tried to build into that school, which is called the Francis W. Parker Essential School, and you can see it at parker.org. It's a kind of a homemade website, but you can read about it and see it. And it's almost 20 years old now, and truly its design has remained very, very robust. But what we saw is that when students really value something, when they have something that they really value, and when the school pays attention to that they will knock themselves out to work at it and work hard at it, even though it's frustrating. And since that was my own personal experience too, starting, you know, with the print shop, basically, I worked harder at that than I ever worked at anything before that. And then it turned into my life. I mean, my life became making things with words. And so I guess Ted was really a huge influence on that, because he had this approach to every child as being really somebody who was interesting. And you could put him in a room full of grown-ups, and if there were a child in the room, Ted would be talking to the child. No matter how important the grown-ups were, he was always on the level of the child, talking to the child, and asking really good questions. So that became, he was really my greatest model, and there's not a day that I don't think of that when I sit down with a student and start asking him or her about his or her experience. And it really, not to categorize them, not to judge them, not to say you can or cannot do this or that, but just to say, who are you, and what are you thinking about, and what makes you interested? And I think that that's my approach towards schooling in general. The more we can do of that, the more we'll have schools like the ones that Ira is describing.
Okay, how do I get the two of you and Pat Ferenga in one place for a week to just talk? That would be really fun.
That would.
Okay, those of you who are in the chat, let's do this. If you use Twitter, put in your Twitter handle into the chat, and one thing that you're passionate about. If you've been here before, you know this. We've played this game before. But put your Twitter handle in and something you're passionate about, and those of you who would like to, you can actually save the chat before we finish if you want to connect with somebody outside of what we're doing here. But as you put in your Twitter handle and the thing that you care about, then we'll let Ira and Kathleen call on you to ask questions so you can tell us about what you do. Also, Alan Shapiro, I'm going to have to look that up. And I've been buying used books like crazy through these sessions because people mention books, and I love book recommendations. Jamie says she's passionate about libraries, authentic places of learning and community. Okay, Ira, I know you want to ask Jamie a question about libraries and maybe tell a little bit about what you're doing at Albemarle in the libraries.
Well, I guess, we're very passionate about libraries in Albemarle County, and we've invested a ton of money and energy in them. So, and our libraries have everything from tools and power tools and hacker spaces in them to all sorts of other things. But what Jamie, what do you see as crucial to school libraries in particular?
Amy, you can grab the microphone if you'd like by clicking on the talk button, or you can reply in the chat. Jamie says, I think that we just have to fight to keep libraries in schools. Did either of you want to comment? Feel free.
I'm going to post a YouTube video of an English lesson, 9th grade English lesson taking place in one of our high school libraries. So you can take a look at what we're doing in ours.
How fun. Jane says, why would anyone see changing education so much? Isn't there anything good about our past? Okay, good question, Jane. So, Ira or Kathleen, would either of you like to address that?
I'm looking for the question again.
The question is, why would anyone see changing education so much? I think why would you be talking so much about changing education? Isn't there anything good about our past?
Well, we live in a kind of an uneasy time when this current policy climate has a history in the past. In other words, that we saw this database accountability thing coming in the middle of the 90s, but I mean, what's he talking about in terms of past? Are we talking about the way past, the years of the one-room schoolhouse and McGuffey readers, or is he talking about the past of the early 70s when people began to have free schools? Are we talking about, I mean, many things in our past are very, very useful, but I think that we're living in a time when things are also changing greatly, and things like the use of online learning and things like this are changing how we think about learning. And I think we always have to be changing the way, the circumstances in which students learn. And I mean, somebody talks about libraries as being essential in a school, and I myself love what's happening in Chicago with Nicole Pinker's project, where she's having middle school kids go to libraries to generate tremendous amount of really youth-generated learning and critique on things that they're passionate about, and then she's hooking them up with their English teachers at school to create a whole new kind of literacy that I haven't seen happen before in my 30 years of writing about education, and which is extremely powerful in the lives of those students. But then I've also been in other schools where the new ways means sitting students down in front of computers and having them take bubble tests on computers and calling that mastery learning, which I don't think is any progress at all, frankly. So I think we want to look back to the past that honored individual differences in our students and said not everybody does the same thing in school, and the act of school is not the same thing for everybody. And partly, that certainly wasn't the kind of school that I went to. I went to schools where everybody did the same thing. But the schools that I admire aren't like that. So I think we have many paths, and we have many ways to interpret them, and then we have things that we can take and use and other things that we really do want to discard. So I guess I'm very curious what people want to keep and what they want to introduce. And I like libraries as a source of being kind of a nexus of those things.
Ira, Jane has continued to comment in the chat, and she said, for example, will we really see books disappear, and isn't reading a paper book an okay thing anymore? And then she says, I just don't see computers replacing teachers, but it feels as if that's what some want. What's the value in a teacher anyway? I actually think that you and Kathleen would really agree with what Jane is saying. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think there are two things. I think, Jane, first of all, I think books are an idea, and I don't care whether they come in scrolls or hacked into stone tablets or on video screens, or for me as audiobooks. However people want to get to the story, it doesn't matter to me. Books on paper don't work for me at all. So if they work for you, that's great. I can go to the Brooklyn Public Library today and they can print out any book I want in 2.5 minutes on this press they have as a paperback, or 3 minutes for a hardcover for me, and that's fabulous. Or I can download it as digital form or get it as an audiobook any way I want. So, the medium doesn't matter to me. If paper is important to you or to any student, we can put it on paper. That's not a problem. But insisting on paper doesn't make any sense to me in this day and age. As far as computers replacing teachers, there's no way in the world I would favor that at all. Computers don't replace teachers. Computers help teachers get kids the resources they need, and they change teachers' role because, in my hand here, I have access to every library on the planet. And that makes life very different than it was. So we're long past the day when a teacher had a textbook, and textbooks were originally created so that school districts didn't have to hire educated teachers. That was the goal of textbooks. The idea was that if you had a textbook for a teacher to follow, it was a script. The teacher didn't have to know the subject. And that's why textbooks were invented in the 1880s, because schools didn't want to pay the cost of college-educated male teachers. They wanted to be able to hire women for much, much less who had not gone to college, and thus the textbook was created as a script for them to read. Information was expensive then, and anthologies made sense. We don't need to do that anymore. Information is inexpensive now, available everywhere, and we can do that. Yes, Jane, I think listening to a book is really reading, and I think most blind people would agree with me. I don't think that's that's an issue at all. But I think the way we use computers, our access to information, our ability to teach kids curation, which is what they'll have to do all their life, makes teachers so essential. You know, our teachers, certainly where I work, are really wrapping their heads around this, even with kindergartners. So kindergartners are starting to put together their own textbooks, build their own systems of things, because they are starting to learn to curate, learn to separate what's important for them from what doesn't make sense. And that's the most important skill we can build. Yeah, Steve, you know, Socrates opposed literacy. And he had good reasons for it, because technology always moves us a step away from the speaker, but it also moves us a step toward democracy, and I think that's the critical thing. I know we're sort of at the end of the time, so let me send it back to Steve.
Yeah, we are at the end of the time, but no matter when that end of time would be with the two of you, it would be way too soon. However, our commitment is to letting people go and do the things that they want to do. Go meet and greet others. Hopefully you've met some people tonight that will make a difference for you. Ira, Kathleen, thanks so much. Thanks to Peggy and Kathleen for working through the tech and getting on. Have a great night or day, depending on where you are. Take care. Thanks, Ira. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thanks, Steve.
So fun to be with both of you. Okay, tomorrow night, another blockbuster night. Was that Kathleen?
I said it's great to be here. Thanks for being so indulgent.
Hardly. So much fun.
Yeah.
Okay, and tomorrow night, we've got so much going on. Tomorrow night, don't miss Carl Fish, Lee Colbert, and Will Richardson. That should be a ton of fun. Take care, everybody. Bye now.